Good morning, Crossroads Nation. My name is 𝙔𝙤𝙪𝙧. I'm a financial advisor with Thrivent Financial. I'm your host this morning. It is great to have you. I don't know where it is. We got people joining us from not all over the country, but all over the world. And I don't know what the weather is like where you are in Minnesota. It's still a little chilly. We thought we got beyond spring, not quite. And our speakers from northern Minnesota, and it's all white where he is. So have a little sympathy for the poor man. Now we're all struggling to get to spring, but it is great to have you this morning. We've got an excellent program for you. I've got a word of faith that I'll share, and also I've got a faith story to be shared with you, and then our speaker, Dave Cornell, is going to speak on cultivating courage, which he speaks on all over the country. He's a great speaker. I've heard him before, so you're in for a treat. But I would like to start with a word. We're believe that the Bible, which I like to call the owner's manual, is important in life, certainly, but certainly in job transition. And the one thing that I wanted to talk on is something that certainly was an issue for me in my own job transition, and that was expectations. And not only my own expectations, but the expectations of people that were around me in going through the journey with me. What I'm taking it from is a book called How Long, O Lord, How Long, written by Dale Kreinkamp. It's a wonderful devotional for people specifically in job transition. Actually, make sure you stay tuned. At the end of our program this morning, I'm going to tell you on how you can get a free copy of this book, which is wonderful. So make sure you stay tuned. But again, talking about expectations, because I know my own expectations in job transition were unrealistic. I thought I'd just go out and go on a couple interviews and take my pick from all these jobs that would just be sitting there, and that wasn't the case. And so my expectations were really off. And certainly my wife has never been through job transition, so she didn't know, and so hers were equally off because mine were. And so sometimes that the expectations being kind of out of whack can be a problem, because going along with expectations are opinions. And everybody's got one, right? And that can be super fun when people are offering opinions. Well, why aren't you doing this? And geez, you haven't landed yet. Well, what's wrong with you, or whatever? They can say some just incredibly encouraging things, not meaning to say hurtful or negative things, but a lot of times it can come across that way. And so I would suggest that make sure that you try to be as realistic as you can in your own expectations, but also communicate with the people. Dale talked about start conversations early and talk about what you think and what people in your spouse or significant other think, and share your fears and anxieties. I know as a Swedish person with Swedish heritage, that's super easy for me, talking about fears and feelings and stuff. It's like, that wasn't really easy for me, but I worked at it, and I certainly was able to at least share sufficiently so my wife and people close to me knew what was going on with me. And that's really helpful, because if they don't really know what's going on with you, it's hard for them to help. And so certainly look at doing that, and maybe even if you have a significant other, take time away every week to get away from kids or distractions or whatever, and just really kind of talk about where you're at and kind of what's going on. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, because there are a lot of ups and downs in the process, and it can really be difficult. So focus on that. I certainly look to Mark 10:9 when it says, "Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." And the people in our lives, certainly our spouses, if we're married, are there for us. And but so is the Lord. And so turn to the people in your life, turn to the Bible. You're not in this alone, but make sure that you're being realistic with the expectations and communicate as best you can, so you can be on the same page and move forward in this process as quickly as possible, and hopefully as smoothly as possible till you get to the end. So join me in prayer. Kind Heavenly Father, thank you for every person that's joining us this morning from whatever part of the country or world they're in whatever stage of job transition that they're in, Lord. And just please be with Dave and help him with his message, that he connects with people and says things that they need to hear, and just hear prayers that are offered and even silent prayers that are not. You know what all of us need, and we just pray that you will help us get it and focus on you ultimately. In your kind and heavenly name, amen. To continue in this light, Brian Bach is with us, and he is a professional recruiter, recruits senior executives, knows this space very, very well, has for years. I mean, I think he's been recruiting since the late 50s, so he looks a lot younger than that, but kidding, it hasn't been that long. But Brian knows the space well, and he's got a great message for us, and so we're fortunate to have him. Good morning, Brian. Welcome.
Good morning, Skip. Appreciate that. Hopefully the message is great. You certainly teed it up to be so. So now I have a standard to rise to. Anyway, as Skip said, I've been recruiting for a long time. So that is the lens that I'm coming to all of you through, is my observations of candidates, and specifically speaking, unemployed candidates, although I would say some of this is all candidates. So what I want to touch on are the great theological virtues. We use, I think Skip rightly defines the Bible as the user manual. Well, there's a lot of manuals provided to us, I would say, by God. And the virtues are definitely part of that. So if we think faith, hope, and love, how can that shape your job search? This is not an abstraction. These ideas are real if you understand the terms and understand how to use those virtues to support your life. And in your transition of a job now, it'll support that beautifully. So we'll talk about that. And by the way, so I'm going to focus on the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. You're going to hear Dave talk a lot about courage, which is one of the cardinal virtues. We have temperance, prudence, justice, and courage. So you're going to get a lot of virtues, but they are great tools to have in your toolbox as you go out into the world searching for another role. So let's start with faith. I'm sure you're wondering, how in the world is faith a tool that I can use in my job search? I'm not proposing that just believe you'll get a job and go get them. That's not it at all. So if we define the term faith, which is a technical definition, but it is an assent of the mind to things revealed. An assent of the mind to things revealed. What I observe, and have observed for 27 years in executive recruiting, is that most people don't know themselves. Not well. They know incredibly well everything that they've ever done professionally, certainly everything they've ever accomplished, but they don't know themselves well. And so as an interviewer, interviewing candidates that don't know themselves well, I tend to walk away from that feeling like I didn't get to know who they are. I know what they've done, but I don't know who they are. And if you've ever heard the term, it's who you know that gets hired, that's exactly right. So you have to become known. So faith, an assent of the mind to things revealed. Do you let your mind assent to what God gave you that makes you uniquely you? Maybe you did a great job of performing 4 acquisitions for your company, but how did you do it that would be different than anyone else? So think of hows and whys as you're answering interview questions, and not just whats. You slowly, I don't need you to tell me your whole life story in one narrative, but every interview question you can conceive of, if you can slip in hows or whys, start to reveal something that's unique about you. How you do things, why you do things, that's you. Nobody else can make that same claim because everyone does things a little differently, and it starts to reveal who you are. And once I know that, then it's possible to hire you. But until I know the who, we struggle to differentiate you from any other candidate who also has a great list of whats. So that's faith. Assent of the mind to things revealed. God revealed and gave you things. Do you know them? Have you allowed yourself to sit and reflect on how you do things, why you do things? Do that, and you'll be different in your job search. So that's one tool, faith. Moving on to hope. Hope, and again, if we define the term, it's a desire for something and then a reasonable expectation for receiving it. So we desire something. What do you desire? Obviously, in this scenario, you desire a job. Do you have a reasonable expectation of receiving that? I would say, sure, I hope so. And maybe the best example of hope that I see in our current world is the movie Shawshank Redemption. So maybe some of you have heard me do this before, but Shawshank Redemption puts hope on full display. We have Ellis Redding, Red, who does not have hope. And then we have Andy Dufresne, who comes into the prison, by the way, an innocent man. So he comes into this prison an innocent man, and he carries with him into that space hope. And what did it do for Andy versus what we see Red and how Red behaved? Andy behaved in a very specific way because he had hope. His behavior was to pick at a wall for 20 years. And ultimately, that picking at that wall, that behavior, that it was hope that drove that, and hope that made that possible for him to do that. For 20 years, he did it. He was patient, he was diligent, and it spurred that activity, that action in him, because he had hope. So I want you to have that same hope, and I want you to think about what Andy did and think about what you do every day as a candidate. Are you picking at that wall? Are you reaching out? Are you connecting with people? Are you setting up meetings with people? Are you networking as much as you can? 2 networking meetings a day, every day. That's picking at the wall. And then don't presume time. Don't worry about time. This is a marathon. If you take the marathon approach, you'll be okay. Andy's disposition, even when he was being tortured by fellow prisoners, never changed. That hope never changed. And he was in it for the long haul, obviously. 20 years of picking at a wall is in it for the long haul. And he was innocent. So he had every right to be dour and angry, but that's not the way he carried himself. Whereas Red had anger, he was dour. Now, obviously, if you just dig in sort of past the surface of his relationship with Andy, you see that hope has no place here was his word. And he did nothing to change his circumstances. So let hope drive your activity. So finally, we're going to go to love. And you're probably wondering, how in the world can love help me get a job? It's a good question. So let's define the term. Love. Technically speaking, it's an act of the will. It's not an emotion or a sentiment. Love is willing the good of the other. So in the Christian worldview, we have this very strange icon that depicts love beautifully, and it's almost disturbing to look at. That's the icon of love. How in the world is that love? Well, I think we have to think about what Jesus was doing on that cross. Was he thinking about himself? Did he do that for him? No, he allowed that to happen to him. He certainly could have stopped it if he wanted to, but he did it for everyone else. So one of the dispositions I see with unemployed candidates is they are struggling. And when human beings struggle, they have this tendency to fold in on themselves, and they get overly concerned with their own lives, their own struggles. We all do it. So this is no judgment, but it's trying to break away from that and get out and think about others. Well, how do you do that when you're struggling? So obviously Jesus was struggling. He was in a lot of pain, physically, emotionally. He was abandoned by his friends, tortured by his enemies, and he let that all happen for others. So you can do it too. He's done it before you, and he's done it dramatically. So I think you can do the same thing. How do you focus love on others? Well, here's what I would say in a job search I find as a common statement made by a lot of candidates, whether employed or unemployed. And that is the statement that I want to make sure I'm setting myself up for success. Fair question, but the subtle difference between that and the same statement being, I want to make sure that I can help you, that I can solve your problems if I take this job. One is sort of a narcissistic approach. I say sort of because I don't think that's necessarily the spirit of that comment, but it does come across a little bit that way. I want to make sure I set myself up for success. That's sort of all about you. Versus taking an altruistic approach. I want to make sure that I'm the right person for you, that I can help you, that I can solve your problems, that I can achieve what you want to achieve in this job. And so that mindset going into an interview will create a curiosity in you that's very attractive. And that curiosity is about them, what their needs are, what they're struggling with, what the barriers are, and really start to position you, because you're going to hear from them what those struggles are, to be able to tell your story, who you are against that, and how you can help them. So I want to focus one more thing about, real quickly, about, I would say it's about love and pride, that turning in on ourselves. If you're familiar with the 13th century poet Dante, he wrote Dante's Inferno. If you're not familiar with the book, it's phenomenal. But the final layer, it's these different layers of hell, and it ends up in pride at the very end of this journey into the depths of hell. At the very bottom of that is pride, the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. Again, that turning in on ourselves that we all as humans tend to do when we're in struggle. So what does that look like? The image that was that was painted, this was painted in the 18th century by an artist in reaction to Dante's book. That image was haunting to me. And if you think about Shawshank Redemption, if you've seen the movie, the prison Shawshank was gray, colorless, lifeless, devoid of joy. It was terrible. And yet Andy held on to hope. I do love that. But anyway, this artist painted that final level of hell, that pride. You want things your way. He in Dante's world, he gave it to you your way. Hell was depicted as this colorless, damp, gray cave, and it was massive and deep. And the person that he painted in there was Virgil, was tiny little figure in this massive chasm of nothing, just gray nothingness. And at the very bottom of this were all these dead bodies. It was this depiction of hell. You want to have everything for yourself? That depiction haunts me. I don't think anyone wants to be separated as themselves in that kind of an eternity. So we have to grab onto love, which is with thinking about others. Don't make it about you and find yourself in that lonely, dark space where you're all by yourself. No, connect to people. Understand that giving yourself in love to serve others is really what you're called to do. It doesn't mean you still have to tell your story and share who you are, but you also have to get to know who that company is and what their needs are, and really focus to the degree that you can on getting to know that client, and you will stand out in the interview processes. Or interview process that you get involved with. So faith, hope, and love, they are great tools to use in your job search that will hopefully be tools, not as abstractions, but actual practical tools that you can use to stand out in the job search. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Skip, but I wish you all the very best of luck, and hopefully you'll all succeed and navigate this job search process efficiently and quickly, and everything will come full circle for you. Hi, Skip.
Thank you so much, Brian. Great message and fantastic insights. I think we can learn from them not only in job search, but just in life, right?
Sure.
So really appreciate your time and your insights this morning.
You bet.
Okay, our speaker this morning, 𝙤𝙤𝙪𝙧. If you've been around Crossroads, he has spoken to us before. I've heard Dave. He's a great speaker, and he has a great message. So this morning he's going to be talking about cultivate courage. And Dave's message and what he does is share this message all over the country and the world, came out of job transition, out of job loss. And so it's interesting how a lot of times it sucks when we go through job loss, but there can be positive things that come from it, and a lot of times not things that we can imagine, or at least our expectation, to my point earlier. So we're so fortunate to have Dave here this morning, and I'm looking forward to hearing his message also. So good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Skip. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you from wherever you are. Actually, I can't see you, but I can see your names, and so I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be with you this morning. And it was interesting as Skip was talking before. He talked about his expectations in job transition and thought, oh, I'll take a couple of interviews and it won't be that big a deal. And that was my case too. And I found out, and you'll hear more about that journey as we go this morning. So, but before we begin, I do need to share my screen. So give me just a moment while I get this all set up, and then we will go ahead and get started. So great to be with you. And as Skip said, it's a snowy morning here up in northern Minnesota. So wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying warm weather. So again, I lost my job back in January of 2010. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go. But I talk about fear and courage and how those two emotions impact us in our everyday lives. And very often, most often, I would say, we don't even think about it. We don't recognize the role of fear in our life because it has become a default for us. It's a default position that is comfortable, even though we may not like it. We understand it, and so we stay in that default position. And yet I believe we all can be courageous too. I want you to think about a time when you did something courageous in your life. Here is the image that I had in my mind, or that I have in my mind, and this is what it looked like when I did my very first courageous thing, at least that I can remember. It was the summer of 1961. I had finished kindergarten in the spring, and in the fall would be a first grader. My brother had finished second grade, and in the fall he would be a third grader. And I was at his baseball game, standing behind the backstop with my two best friends, Dennis and Doug. As we stood behind the backstop, my brother's team was taking the field for the last half of the last inning. If they got the team out, they would win the game. My brother's team would win the game. Very quickly, they got the first two outs. Then the next batter that was coming up to the plate was a guy named Billy. And in Wahoo, Nebraska, where we lived at the time, Wahoo, Nebraska, Billy was a bully. Billy was a second grader, soon to be third grader, and you did not mess with Billy. Well, as he was walking to the plate, my friends Dennis and Doug said, Dave, we dare you to yell at Billy while he's at bat. And I said, no way. I am not saying anything to Billy because you don't mess with Billy. And they egged me on, and then they said what we really said back in the day, Dave, we double dog dare you. Well, you know, you can't turn down the double dog dare. So Billy started to dig in, and the pitcher went into his windup, and he fired that first pitch, and I hollered, swing, batter, swing. Billy swung and missed. Dennis and Doug and I jumped up and down. We punched each other in the arms because the high five hadn't even been invented yet. And we turned back to watch for the next pitch. And Billy was staring right at me. That got Dennis and Doug really excited. Come on, Dave, do it again, do it again, do it again. Pitcher goes into his windup. He fires that next pitch. Swing, batter, swing. Billy swings and misses. Strike two. Dennis and Doug and I jump up and down some more. We turn back for the next pitch, and Billy is staring at me again. Dennis and Doug are beside themselves now and punching me even more. And come on, Dave, we double dog dare you. You got to do it one more time. Pitcher goes into his windup, fires that pitch. Swing, batter, swing. Billy swings and misses. Strike three. My brother's team wins the game. Dennis and Doug and I jump up and down, and we turn to walk away. And there's Billy. Billy had dropped his bat, immediately came around the backstop, and I am there looking eyes to chin up at Billy. I noticed him begin to clench his fist, and he reared back, and pow, he hit me right in the stomach. Well, he didn't actually hit me in the stomach. He hit me a little bit lower, hit me right in the bladder, and literally made me wet my pants. To this day, I can still remember as I walked home that night, the warm feeling that I had. Not because I'd been punched in the stomach and wet my pants, but because I'd had the courage to do something that Dennis and Doug didn't have the courage to do. We're going to talk about fear and courage today. Both of them had a price. I paid a price for having the courage to yell at Billy while he was at bat. But there is also a price to fear, and we'll talk about that. And maybe even some of you are paying that price right now and not even aware of it. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. Fear is something that we all experience, even as adults. I remember growing up that I used to think that someday I'm not going to be afraid of things. Well, the reality is at almost 67 years of age, guess what? I still have a lot of things that I fear, things that pop up daily, things that have been in my life for periods of time, but I still have fear. If we're willing to admit it, we all have it. Fear is something that when we call up our friends and say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee or let's go grab a beer, and while we're there, let's talk about our fears. We don't do that. We hold those things close to the vest. We want people to think that life is okay and we don't have any challenges. And so we don't talk about those things that cause us fear and anxiety and keep us from becoming who God created us to be. Courage, on the other hand, is a word that we often reserve for firefighters and police officers and soldiers. That's things that courage is something that other people do. Courage is something that happens for other people, or they are in situations where they are required to be courageous. That's not us. Yet I truly believe we all have opportunities to be courageous. And even in our job searches and transitions, I think we encounter these almost on a daily basis. This whole presentation is founded on Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. As I told you, I went through job transition starting in January of 2010. You'll hear more about that in just a little bit. But this verse became my life verse at that point in time. And here's the story behind this, and I'm sure many of you know this, but Moses, who's leading the people from Egypt into the promised land, has died. And Joshua is the one who was the second in command. And so God is talking to Joshua in the first chapter of Joshua. And here's what I envision in my mind. I envision God with his arm around Joshua up on a hill or up on a big bluff, looking down into the promised land. And as he has his arm around Joshua, this is what he's saying and telling him. And he's also telling him, I know what is in front of you. I know that this is going to be a tough, tough road, and it is going to be difficult for you. But I am commanding you right now, and he did this earlier in Joshua 1. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Well, the very same God that had his arm around Joshua has his arm around you as you go on this journey of job transition or job search, depending on if you're changing from one position to another, or maybe you've been out of work for a while. God has his arm around you, and he is with you as you go through this journey. So just keep that in mind as we talk today, and keep that in mind as you face challenges as you go through your job transition. Well, there's two kinds of fears that we face in our lives. First of all, there's rational fear, and rational fear is a good thing. Fear can be a good thing. If the building that you are in right now, maybe it's your home, if your home were to catch on fire, it would be a rational thing for you to have a level of fear and get up and get out, make sure that the rest of your family is out, grab whatever you can, whatever time will allow, and get out. That is rational fear. That is a good thing. The second kind of fear that we face is irrational fear. And this is the kind of fear where we lay in bed at night and we say to ourselves, why did I not call that person that I got the name from? Skip gave me that name of that person that might be able to help me with my job transition. I have no idea who they are, but Skip said, tell them you know me and they might be able to help you. But you were afraid to call them because you didn't know who they were. So you laid in bed at night and you said, why didn't I call that person? As you reviewed your day and you vow tomorrow is going to be different. Tomorrow I'm going to make that call first thing in the morning. The morning rolls around and you look at your watch and you say, well, it's only 8 o'clock. It's probably too early to call him. So I better not do that. I'll wait till 9. And then 9 o'clock comes and you are going through your emails and you've got an email from a friend that links you to a YouTube video. And so you go off to that YouTube video and now you're in YouTube and you start watching it. You get distracted. And so you again lay in bed the next night with that very same feeling, that very same sense of why didn't I? That's what we're going to talk about today, that irrational fear of why didn't I? Here's the ways that it can look for you. You don't feel you're good enough. You don't feel you're worthy. You're afraid of what others might think or say. Well, what if this person doesn't call me? Or what if they say they don't know Skip? Or what if? You have this need to meet others' expectations and you don't feel that you're smart enough, or you don't feel that you're too old or you're too young. You're afraid of disappointing others. You're afraid of failure. You're afraid of what's next. And so you don't do anything. That's how irrational fear can play itself out. How it shows up for us: avoidance, procrastination, perfection, blame, settling, compromising, rationalizing, apologizing. You can add to that list if you've got something. Those top 3 are the ones that were most often and still remain most often in my life. When we're afraid, we avoid things. When we're afraid, we procrastinate, which is another another type of avoidance. We wait for things to be perfect. I've often had people say perfection. How is it that is how fear shows up? What does that have to do with fear? Well, if we are perfectionists, and many of us are, even though we don't think that we are, we want to wait for everything to be perfect. We want to wait for all of the ducks to line up. We want to wait for our resume to be just perfect before we send it out to anybody. We want to wait till we get that perfect LinkedIn photo before we're going to do anything. And so we put it off, and we want to put it off. It's got to be perfect. That is one that I didn't realize until my sister-in-law shared that with me. And wow, what an eye-opener that was for me. So how does fear show up for you in your life? And can you start to become more aware of it today? I'll give you a moment to ponder this photograph. My son-in-law took this with a group of friends on their way to the Boundary Waters a number of years ago. As I look at this image, the question that I ask myself is, how far out in the road would that branch have had to be before that paint stripe driver would have done something about it? Obviously, this was not far enough. As I look at this, then I think too, how big do our fears have to get before we do anything about them? Very often our fears start out small in nature. And so we have to ask ourselves, how big do they have to get before we do anything about it? Because very often we put our fears off and they begin to look just like this. Oh, I've got a little issue here. I apologize. I got to close my chat box. And well, let's see here. What's happening? There we go. Our fears become like this. They become so big that we now can't do anything about them. Where we want to be is on the other side of that boulder where that red truck is. This is an image that was taken in the mountains of Colorado. And in order to get to where the red truck is, we have to take a detour of 223 miles because of that detour. Fear causes us to take detours in our lives. Fear caused me to take detours in my life. And I'll tell you more about that here in a little bit as we go. Detours are great things. And the detours that I took, I was allowed to work for great companies. I met wonderful people, had the opportunity to travel. And that's what fear allowed me to do. But ultimately, I would keep coming back to this boulder that was in front of me. And I'll tell you more about that in just a little bit. Never underestimate the value of a crisis. And Skip talked about this a little bit. You know, when bad things happen to us, you know, being unemployed, and some of you may have been out for a while now, but recognize that there is opportunity in this crisis. In January of 2010, as I told you earlier, I lost my job. As Skip said, I had expectations that I'd have a job in a month or two. I had no idea how bad the economy was back in 2008 through 2012 and 13. I thought I'd get a job in a month or two. I didn't. I started attending job networking groups like Crossroads, and I found many, many people that are were far more capable than I am. And they were out of work and had been out of work for a long, long time. Over the course of time, we started going through all of our savings. I started seeing a counselor because I wasn't doing well at all and handling this long length of being unemployed. I was diagnosed with situational depression. I avoided going to places. I avoided going to church because I didn't like that they asked Skip, how's the job search going? These are well-meaning people, but I didn't have any answers for them. And so I avoided going to places so I didn't have to talk to them. Again, diagnosed with situational depression. Fast forward to February of 2011, my wife loses her job. She worked at a church and had for 15 years. The giving in the church was way down. And so somebody had to be let go, and my wife was the first one out. Over the course of that time, we went through all of our savings and we ended up losing our home. And in June of 2011 was when we closed on the sale of that home. So here we are in our mid-50s. We have no jobs, we have no money, and we have no place to live. It was an incredibly big crisis time in our lives. Yet I can tell you today, now 12 years later, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it forced me to see, with the help of my counselor, the role that fear had been playing in our lives, and in my life in particular. Romans 5:3-4 says, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. This was a time of perseverance and character building that led to a time of hope for me. As you think about the challenges that you're facing right now, and maybe some of you are in difficult financial straits as well, what are you learning? What is God trying to teach you? Can you step back from the crisis and say, okay, Lord, what have you got for me? That's what I had to learn to do, was to step back from the crisis. So often we get mired in it that it is difficult for us to step back and say, okay, Lord, what are you doing here? What are you teaching me? Well, today we are going to look at 3 steps to courage. And I see we've got people commenting in the chat box, which is great. But I found that when I click on the chat box, then I'm not able to move my slides forward and back. So we'll take a look at those later, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some conversation. So the first step in becoming more courageous is to name your fear. You have to acknowledge it. Think of Moses in Exodus 3-4. Moses was a guy who did not want to be the person leading the Israelites to the promised land. He did not feel he was worthy. He did not feel he was good enough. He felt that and knew that he had messed up in his life by murdering someone. So he did everything that he could in trying to talk God out of it. Often our fear is a result of past experience. What are the past experiences in your life right now that are holding you back, that are a part of the fear that is playing itself out in your life? Dr. Phil says you cannot change what you don't acknowledge. You have to be willing to say, yes, I am afraid. You have to be willing to share it with someone. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not acknowledging it, and you're not going to move forward and move past it. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my bolder fear and help you to understand how this whole thing started for me. On November 7th of 1969, I was sitting in Mr. Wilson's math class in Buffalo, Minnesota, where we moved. My dad was a pastor, and we moved from Nebraska to Minnesota in the 3rd grade in 1963. And I was sitting in Mr. Wilson's math class, 9th grade, 9:30 in the morning, and there's a knock on the door. Mr. Wilson went to see who was there, and after a couple moments, he turned to me and he said, David, collect your books, and they need to see you in the office. So I picked up my books, and as I started to walk out, all of my friends were saying, hey, Dave, what'd you do now? What'd you do now? And I was a good kid. I didn't get in a lot of trouble. So I was curious too as to why I'm being called down to the office. I went into the office, and the administrative assistant said, Dave, go down that hallway and go in the second door on the right. So I went down that hallway, and I went into the second door on the right. And there was my older brother, Phil, now a junior, and the Catholic priest from town. And he said, Dave, your dad died this morning. At 7:30, when I left for school, Dad was alive. 9:30, Dad's dead. We walked across the street to the elementary school to pick up my younger brother, who was a third grader. As we came out of the school, the Catholic priest got us in a little semicircle, and he said, now, boys, this is going to be tough, especially on your mom. I don't want you to cry. I don't want you to ask any questions. I just want you to be men. Now, a lot of people cringe when I say that, but in 1969, that's kind of the way things were. And so I listened to him very, very well. I didn't cry. I didn't ask any questions. And I did what I thought it meant to be a man. But the reality is, at 14 years of age, I didn't really know a lot about that yet. Fast forward 2 weeks, and basketball practice has started. I'm 6'7". Basketball has been a big part of my life, all my life. And basketball practice got over the first week of basketball practice for the 9th grade team. I lived literally across the street from the school. I walked across the street to the parsonage that we lived in. And as I came in the house, my mom called to my 2 brothers, time for supper, boys. So they came to the table. I sat down in my seat. Mom went over to the kitchen counter, picked up the food, and brought it over to the kitchen table, and she set it on the table. She started to cry, and she paused, and then she said, I can't believe I set 5 places instead of 4. She'd set a place for Dad 2 weeks after he's gone, 2 weeks or a week after the funeral, and she'd set a place for Dad. She went back into her room crying. We sat there quietly. Eventually, my older brother got up there and went back and talked to her. The next night when practice was over, I didn't want to go home to that. So I stayed after, shot baskets for a little while, took my time in the shower. I got home about 6:15. Supper was neatly folded up on aluminum foil and sitting in the refrigerator. I turned on the oven and warmed up my supper in the oven. When it was ready, I took it and sat and went into the family room and watched TV with my brothers while I ate my supper. We lived in that parsonage for 7 more months. I never ate supper again in that house. My counselor helped me to recognize that that was the beginning of a pattern of avoidance when things were difficult or challenging or that scared me. And it started with that. And she helped me to recognize those things in my work life, in my school life, in my relational life, over and over and over again. Avoidance stepped up often. Wow, I needed to begin to change things. I needed to begin to face those fears. What are the fears that you have, maybe in relation to your job search or transition, but maybe it's outside of that, that fear is holding you back because you're not willing to acknowledge it. So one of the things that I've always wanted to do was to be a speaker, to be a speaker and a coach and a trainer. This goes back to when I was 28 years old. And my counselor helped me to begin to recognize that I avoided that as well when it got difficult. One of the things that she helped me to uncover was my self-talk. So if I want to be a speaker, but this is what my self-talk is, guess what? I'm not likely to become a speaker. So think about your self-talk as I go through this. As you think about maybe reaching out to somebody that might help you, as you think about applying for a job that you look on Indeed and, oh, you've only got 6 of the 10 qualifications, so I'm not going to apply for that. What goes on in your mind? What do you say to yourself? This is what I said to myself about becoming a speaker. Who am I that anybody would want to hear what I have to say? I'm just a guy. Nothing special about being able to stand up in front of a group of people. For me, I get great energy out of doing these kinds of things. I love it. Doesn't mean I don't get nervous. I always do, but it's something that I have great passion for doing. But I therefore think that it's easy and fun for everybody. Now, logically, I know that's not the case, but this is what I would say to myself. Anybody could do this. This is no big deal. I don't have any letters behind my name, so I don't have any credibility. And I'm sure that there are people with us today who have letters behind their name. And I therefore assign that you are much smarter, much more qualified at anything than I am. So why would you want to hear what I have to say? Some of you might be saying, well, I remember on that first slide it says Dave Cornell BBG. You got letters behind your name. I don't know what they stand for, but you've got letters there. Well, those letters just simply stand for big bald guy. That's all that stands for. So I do have letters behind my name. They are earned, but they're not the same kind of letters that you have. And lastly, I don't have a dramatic story. People who are speakers are people who have survived an airline hijacking. They've survived cancer. They were orphaned at the age of 3 and raised in the wilderness by wolves. They have amazing, incredible stories. I don't have that. So again, why would anybody want to hear what I have to say? So here's some action steps for you around step number 1 of naming your fear. Write your fear down. Put it on a piece of paper. Get it out of you. They say if you write your goals down, you are far more likely to achieve them than if you just keep them inside and don't share them with anybody. Write them down. Tell them to somebody. Some of the power of those fears is taken away when you write it down or when you share it with somebody that you trust. Write your self-talk down. Again, our self-talk is a default position in our mind, and we often just default because that's where it's easiest. So write your self-talk down. Find a mentor and a cheerleader. We need to have these for us in our lives, and we need to be these for other people as well. The mentor is the person that has their hand in the small of your back, and you're leaning back going, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. And they're gently pushing you. And for me, I see the Holy Spirit as one of my mentors. The Holy Spirit has his hand in the palm of my back, and he is nudging me forward. And then cheerleaders, people who are going to put their arm around us and say, I can't believe you did that. I don't know that I would have done that, but at least you did something. Didn't turn out the way you wanted it, but at least you did something. We need to have mentors and cheerleaders in our lives. The second step is to frame our fear, begin to see our fear in a different way. John 9:39 says, I have come to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind. You may be blind right now in your search for your next role, whatever that might be, and you need somebody to help you see differently. So how do we begin to see differently? Well, we'll start in the upper left-hand corner here, and the way that we see things, our beliefs about situations, other people, or ourselves affects how we feel. We go to the upper right-hand corner. How we feel affects what we do, our behavior or our actions. What we do affects what we get, our results. And then what we get tends to reinforce how we see or how we believe. So in essence, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? If you see that you're never going to be able to land a job because you've been out for a month or a year or whatever it might, and I'm never, guess what? That's probably the way it's going to stay for a while until you begin to see it in a different way. So let's take a look at some examples, and we're going to look at the ultimate framer first. The story of the adulterous woman in John 8:1-8. The Pharisees brought the adulterous woman to Jesus, and they said, this woman is an adulteress. She needs to die. That was their see of her. How did they feel about her? They despised her. They hated her. What did they do? Well, we don't really know what they did, but we know what they wanted to do. They wanted to stone her, which they likely had done to other women before. And what would they get? They would get a self-righteous feeling of they have rid the world of someone who didn't deserve to see. So how would they see the next adulterous woman? In the very same way. How did Jesus see that woman? He saw her differently. How did he feel about her? He loved her because she was created in the very image of God. What did he do? He saved her. And so what did he get? He got a saved person, another person who was going to share the story of who he is and what he had done for them. So that's an example from the ultimate framer of how we begin to see differently. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a business person who happens to be a Christian? Or do you see yourself as a Christian who happens to be a business person? Those are two very different ways of viewing ourselves. And I think that we really need to recognize that as our culture is changing, it's getting harder and harder to see ourselves as that second one. We've all heard the stories of Christian business people who have stood up for a biblical worldview and had to shut their businesses down, have had to lose their businesses. So it becomes harder and harder. But we have to recognize, again, that the very God that had his arm around Joshua has his arm around us. So how do you see yourself? This is one, boy, I was challenged with this one. How do you see networking? You know, in the world that you're in right now of job transition and job seeking, there's a lot of people that don't like networking. And I was one of them. I used to think, oh, if I go to that networking event, I won't find anybody that can help me there. That was my C about networking. My C about networking was, what can it do for me? So how did I feel about it? Didn't like it. So what did I do? I often didn't do it. What did I get? I didn't get any new names. I didn't get any new contacts. I didn't get any new possibilities. So how did I see the next networking event? I don't want to go to that either. So how can you see networking differently? Don't see networking as something for you, but see networking as something that you might bring for someone else. How do you feel about that? Oh man, I'd better get to this because I might be able to meet somebody that I can have. Maybe I've got a connection for them at a place that might be valuable for them. So what do? We go to that one. We reach out to as many people as we can. We find out how we can help them. One of the things that we are often told through Crossroads and through any types of things you've been on LinkedIn is always close with, what can I do to help you? That's how you want to see networking. Don't see it as something, what can I get out of this? But what can I bring to others? And you'll have a whole different view. How do you see sharing your faith? Well, I'm not an evangelist, so therefore that's not something that I should do. I need to leave that to the evangelists and the pastors. And yet you have a story that can change other people's lives. Just like the adulterous woman has a story now that can change people's lives. See it as an opportunity to bring others to the kingdom. See it as an opportunity to share your story of what God did for you. How about asking for help? How do you see asking for help? Again, I was told by that priest, don't ask for help, don't ask questions. And so I was very good at that. And I still struggle asking for help. We see in our American culture asking for help as a sign of weakness. We've always been told to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and carve our own path. And yet none of us can do that without the help of someone else. Asking for help is truly one of the most courageous things that we can do. Do you see asking for help as a sign of weakness, or do you see asking for help as a sign of courage? So where does our C come from? Our C comes from beliefs that we have about ourselves, and these beliefs that we have about ourselves come from messages. And until you work on changing the message, you'll never change the belief and you'll never change the C. Let me give you an example of that. As I was growing up, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I can remember one evening as I'd been out in the backyard playing catch with my dad, and my mom called me in because it was time for me to help her with the dishes. So I came in and I put my glove on the chair and I said to Mom, Mom, someday I'm going to be a professional baseball player. And very often the messages that we get are well-intentioned messages, but we internalize them in a different way. My mom's response to that was, oh, David, that's a wonderful dream, but those are things that happen to other people. They don't happen to people like us. Wow. Talk about bursting my bubble. So how did that change my belief about myself? Oh, I could never be that. So that changes my C as well. I could never be a professional baseball player. And I had a wonderful mom, and her message was well-intentioned. We all do that as parents. I think we want to protect our kids from hurt. And so we say things to them that hold them back. What are the messages that you've gotten over the course of your life? And we've got about, let's see, it looks like about 14 people with us, along with the crew from Crossroads today. I got to believe that in a group of 14, some of you got some pretty nasty messages while you were growing up that have developed beliefs about who you are, that have developed your C about the world and your place in it. Why did we ever have you? You'll never amount to anything. You don't need to go to college. You're not smart enough for that. You can never do that. And those messages continue to hold you back. What are the messages that you have heard from coaches, from teachers, from parents, from friends, from magazine covers standing in the checkout aisle, from TV? What are the messages that you've got that have developed beliefs about yourself? You can take your fear, whatever it might be, and put it into the middle of that rectangle, and you might see it in one way, but you need to begin to see it in another way. And this is how I began to see my fear of becoming a speaker. I began to see it as selfish. And my counselor, again, is the one that helped me see this, wonderful Christian counselor. And she talked to me about gifts, the spiritual gifts that we have all been given. In 1 Peter 4:10, it says, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. Recognize that the gifts that God has given us are not for us, but for the people that we encounter in our everyday lives. And she helped me to recognize that my ability to communicate and tell stories in a way that can make a difference in people's lives is one of the gifts that God has given me. And if I don't do that because I'm afraid, because I don't think I'm good enough, because I don't think anybody wants to hear what I have to say, that's selfish on my part, because I'm not using the gift that God has given me. So recognize, what is the fear that you have? Recognizing also that very often we think that fear only impacts us, but the reality is that our fear impacts people around us. Who would pay a price if I didn't do this today? I believe somebody needs to hear what I've got to share today. And if I didn't do it because I was afraid, that's selfish on my part, because it's all about protecting me. Here's a powerful example of fear being selfish. Back in 2011, Jerry Sandusky was an assistant football coach at Penn State University. He was arrested for molesting young boys in the Penn State locker room. One morning in 2000, a custodian at Penn State University saw Jerry Sandusky molesting a young boy in the shower room. That very same afternoon, another custodian saw Jerry Sandusky molesting a different boy in the same shower room. They talked to each other about what they had seen, and they decided to go to their manager, their supervisor, and tell them what they had seen. And they decided all to do nothing. They said going against Jerry Sandusky and Joe Paterno and Penn State football was like going against the President of the United States. They said they'll get rid of us all. All of this information is in the free report, which was done after all of this came out. So they chose to say nothing because they were afraid they would lose their jobs. They chose fear over courage. We talked at the early onset about there is a price to both. And for 11 more years, Jerry Sandusky was allowed to molest young boys because these guys didn't speak up. Other people paid a price, a big, big, big price, because they were afraid to speak up. People pay a price when we live in fear. If they had chosen courage and chosen to share the story, is it possible that they could have lost their jobs? Yes, it is. But which of those two prices would you rather pay, knowing that others have paid a significant price? And you have to ask yourself this question: who pays the price for your fear? It's the question that I asked myself this morning as I was waking up. Who would pay a price if I had told Harry I wouldn't do this? Because I believe that one of you would, and maybe more than one of you. Who pays the price for your fear? Here's our action steps around number 2. Write down your messages. What are the things that go on in your head? Again, you've got to get them out. You've got to take some of their power away, and simply writing them out or sharing them with someone is a way to get them out and start to heal from what those messages have told you. Write down your old C and your new C. How are you seeing things now? And this is why it's so important to talk to other people. Talk to people you trust, because you might not be able to break the way that you see it. You might need somebody else to help you to see it in a different way. So write down the old C and what your new C might be, and then write down who is paying a price for your fear and what that might look like. And you may be able to even name someone specifically, or it might be a group of people, or it might be people that you don't even know, but someone is paying a price for your fear. The third step, we've named our fear, we've framed our fear, and now we're going to begin to claim our courage. is to turn your boulders into pebbles. John 10:10 says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. One of my very favorite verses in the Bible, because it gives us both sides of the spiritual fence in one verse. The thief, meaning Satan, comes to only steal, kill, and destroy. But when he comes into our lives to steal, kill, and destroy, he doesn't come with a big flashing red light or a big spear and sheet of armor and banging on your door saying, I'm here and I'm going to steal, kill, and destroy from you. No, he comes into our mind and he says, who do you think you are? And why do you think you can do that? You're too old. You're too young. You don't have letters behind your name, so you can't do that. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. We need to have the courage to step away from the thief and listen to what Jesus says in that last part. I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Through this journey, I learned about the lesson of the crack. This is an image I took 20 years ago, never thought I'd use it for anything, but it's perfect for this analogy of the crack. This is a stalk of corn growing in a road, and you would say to yourself, corn can't grow in a road, and yet here we see a stalk of corn growing in a median. Somehow that seed found a way to work its way down a crack and grow in a place where it would never grow. What are the cracks that you have in this journey? You're facing that boulder, you're pushing against it and pushing against it and pushing against it, and it is going nowhere. And yet, maybe there's a crack that could begin to change this for you. Somehow that stalk of corn grew in a place where we would never think it would grow. Maybe you've thought about starting your own business, but you say, oh no, I could never do that. Well, start to begin to use this word maybe. As I used to say to myself, I'll never make my living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. That's a pretty negative mindset. And if that is your mindset, it's probably not going to happen. I had some friends in this journey who shared with me the power of the word maybe. Dave, they said, put maybe in front of that. Maybe I'll never make my living as a speaker and a coach and a trainer. Suddenly, there is a crack of hope. Maybe I never will, but maybe, just maybe, I will. If I begin to do some things, if I begin to, as Brian talked about, if I begin to pick at the wall, as we look at that big boulder in front of us, I used to push and push and push, and it would never move. And I would walk away and go do another job, find another job, but I would always have this desire to come back to the boulder. My counselor helped me to begin to break the boulder down bit by bit by bit through the intense counseling that I did with her. So reminiscent of what Brian talked about from the Shawshank Redemption, picking at the wall. If you try to move that boulder, it's not going to move it on its own. You've got to begin to break it down. And when they break those boulders down, they take sticks of dynamite, they take jackhammers, pickaxes, and they break it down till they can come and just scoop it up and take it away. So you have to begin to chip away at the boulder. You have to begin to pick at the wall. And so how do we do that? Recognize the fear will always be there. This is not a presentation about becoming fearless. If you want to become fearless before taking any steps, guess what? You're likely not going to do anything. You can go to Google and Google fearless living or living fearlessly. And on both of those, you're going to get roughly 50 million hits of things that you can look up. I think God calls us to live courageously. I think God puts his arm around us and says, I know you're going to be scared in this, but just recognize that I am with you wherever you go. Now, being courageous doesn't mean that always things are going to work out. Being courageous just means that we are putting one foot in front of the other, not knowing what's coming next. I mean, you read what the Israelites went through when they went into the promised land. It was not an easy journey. God didn't spell it out for them, but they kept putting their feet one in front of the other. What's the first step that you need to take that you have been avoiding because fear has been holding you back? The fear will always be there. Would you rather wait to become fearless, Or would you rather be courageous and begin to take those steps now? Do something scary every week. What do you do to take yourself out of your comfort zone? And maybe for some of you, just even being on this webinar with us today was a big step for you. So kudos to you, and I applaud you for doing that scary thing. Maybe it's reaching out to someone that you've had their name and phone number sitting on your desk at home, and you're like, I know I need to call that person. I don't know who they are, but somebody said that they would be a great resource for me. Maybe you need to call them today. Maybe you need to write your resume today. Maybe you need to start to go to the small groups that Crossroads has available. There are so many things that you can do to step out of your comfort zone. Maybe it's to go sing karaoke, which is something you vowed never to do, but it takes you out of your comfort zone. And then afterwards you go, you know what? That really was scary. I didn't like doing it, but I'm so glad I did it. I'm still alive. It wasn't painful at all. Don't discount your own abilities. I believe that every one of us that is on today, both the panelists and those participants, I believe that we are all far more capable than we give ourselves credit for. This is a picture from my sophomore year in high school. As a sophomore, I was brought up to the varsity on the varsity basketball team. That was an unusual thing back in those days. Now, my assistant coach, and you see him, or my head coach, you see him kind of with that arrow pointing at his head. My coach called me in at the beginning of the season, and he said, Dave, we're going to have you play the junior varsity games, but then I'm going to bring you up to the varsity because, you know, you're 6'3", and I think you might grow a little bit more. And in those games where we're way ahead or way behind, if I can get you some experience, I think that might bode well for the next couple of years when you're a junior and you're a senior. Wow, was I excited about that. And so you see the guy on the right-hand side of that picture, and his name is Steve. Steve was a junior. I sat next to Steve. In fact, I was sitting there when this picture was taken. I got cropped out of the yearbook. I didn't even get into the yearbook for this picture because they cropped me out. Steve was a very funny guy. And in these games where we were way ahead or way behind, Steve was the next to the last guy to go in the game, and I was the last guy to go in the game. At the beginning of the season, Steve said, Dave, here's what we're going to do. Before every game, we're going to give money to the manager, and in those games where we're not going to play, he's going to put popcorn and pop underneath our seats so we can enjoy the game like fans. Because that's all we're really going to be as fans, and the coach is going to be so involved in the game, he's not going to notice us on the end of the bench. And so that's what we did. I remember coming to the bench at the start of the first game of the season, and we were playing one of our rivals. So there's no way that we're going to play. Steve and I are going to play in this. And sure enough, there's popcorn and pop underneath our seat. It was amazing. And our manager was so good that somehow he refreshed us at halftime. It was incredible. And that's how the season went. In those games where there were chances where we would play, no popcorn and pop. But if it was a game that no way that we're playing, popcorn and pop was there, and we enjoyed the game as fans. It's late in the season. We have 2 more games left after this particular game. We are playing Chaska High School, and we are tied with them for the conference lead. No way Steve and I are playing in this game. Popcorn and pop is there at the beginning of the game. Popcorn and pop is there at the end, at halftime. And the game is everything everybody thought it would be. We're ahead, they're ahead. It was like the championship game on Monday night. And the game, fans on both sides are going crazy. 5 minutes to go in the game. We are tied with Chaska. I take a handful of popcorn, and all of a sudden I get an elbow from Steve, and he points down to the head coach. And I look down at him, and here's the head coach, and he's waving at me, saying my name. My mouth is full of popcorn. And as I'm going up to him, I'm thinking, what do we need? Do we need water? Do we need towels? What's going on? And the coach says, get in the game for Davis. Wow. My mouth is full of popcorn. I didn't know. I thought, is he crazy? What is he doing? And I went into that game, and in the last 5 minutes, I had 5 points, 4 rebounds, and I blocked a shot. I wish I could tell you we won the game. We didn't win the game. But here's the thing. My coach saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. My coach had watched me start practice back in November and watched me develop in November, December, January, and February. And he watched me grow into something that I had no idea I had inside of me. What are the things that you have inside of you that other people recognize that you pass off as, oh, no, that's no big deal. Anybody can do that. I believe that we are all far more gifted and talented that we can give ourselves than we give ourselves credit for. Do you have the courage to step into who God created you to be? When my coach called me down there, he didn't say, Dave, listen, look at the scoreboard. 5 minutes left to go in the game. I think you should go in. What do you think? No, he simply said, get in the game. Maybe for some of you, that's all you need to hear today. Maybe you've been sitting in the stands as a spectator during this journey of transition. Maybe you just need to hear somebody tell you, you know what? It's time for you to get in the game. Fear calls us to be spectators. Courage calls us to get in the game. Are you willing to step out of the stands and take those courageous steps, not knowing where they're going to lead, knowing that some of them may lead you to failure, but lessons that you can learn? Courage requires action. Courage requires you to do something. Get out of the stands. Ephesians 3:20 says, now all glory to God, who is able through his mighty power at work within us, able to accomplish infinitely far more than we can ever ask or imagine. So your action steps around number 3, create your list to eliminate negative thoughts. Have a game plan for how you are going to overcome this. When you get those messages in your head, what are the steps you're going to take to eliminate those negative thoughts? When you say to yourself, oh no, I'm not ready to apply for that job yet, what are you going to say to yourself to begin to say, you know what, I am going to apply that? Find the crack in your boulder. Instead of saying, I'll never be able to get a job at that company, say, maybe I'll never be able to get a job at that company, because maybe, just maybe, you will. And then begin to do scary things. I'm going to close with this last story, and it's from the movie Night and Day, and night is spelled Knight. It's from, I think, about 2000, somewhere in there. I can't remember exactly. Starred Tom Cruise and Cameron Diaz. They meet in an airplane, and they're sitting across from the aisle from each other, and they start up a conversation. And the conversation was what most of those kinds of conversations are when we first meet people. You know, what's your name? Where are you going? What do you do? Those are the things that they start with. And then they start with the conversation of what they hope to do someday. Cameron Diaz says, someday I hope to write a book. Tom Cruise says, someday I hope to go scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef. Cameron Diaz says, someday I hope to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Tom Cruise brings that conversation then to a very abrupt halt when he says, someday is code for never. Wow. We live in a world of some days. We all have them. The thing about living in a world of some days is they're really nebulous. There's no accountability for us in them. And so we can continue to put our some days off. Someday, I hope to start my own business. Someday, I hope to learn to play the guitar. Someday, I hope to get married and have a family. Someday, someday, someday. Are your some days holding you back? What is it that you want to accomplish on this journey? What is the courageous thing that you want to do that could only happen if you trust God to have his arm around you as you go on this journey? So as we close today, I want you to remember to name your fear. I want you to remember to frame your fear. And I want you to begin to make this day, April 7th, make this day your someday to begin to claim your courage. What can you do courageously today as you are on this journey of transition? I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Here is where you can find out more about me. I'd love to connect with you if there's any way that I can be of help or assistance for you on this journey. I want to strongly encourage you to do that, to just reach out. I've got a book. You can find it on Amazon. I also have an online course that I've created around this that will walk you through all of these steps with some very specific exercises. And you can simply go to cultivate-courage.teachable.com. And when you check out, if you put in the coupon code Crossroads. It'll save you $50. And so these are some ways that you connect with me. These are some ways that you can continue to develop your courage. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and I will turn it back to Harry or to Skip. So that should have taken it back to you guys. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Thanks, Dave. What a message. Wow. I'm ready to go. Let's go. Today is someday. What a great, powerful message. And we're so fortunate that it certainly extends way beyond job transition. So thank you again, Dave. That was wonderful. As I mentioned, I wanted to go through a few resources that Crossroads has for you to help you in your job transition. You're not alone. Dave is an example of wonderful resources and that are here through Crossroads for you. And so make sure that it's something that you take advantage of. So I'm going to share my screen with you and bring up some of the many resources that are available to you through Crossroads. And I'll also talk about the book I mentioned earlier about how you can get a copy of that. So Crossroads operates out of 3 churches. They're represented in front of you. Hopefully you can see that. They are the main church at Grace Church in Eden Prairie, but also through Woodbury Lutheran in Woodbury and North Heights Lutheran Church in Arden Hills. And all the details on everything we do is at mncrossroads.com. Make sure that you check us out there. That is a phenomenal resource for you in job transition, because everything we have is there, whether it's information on the events that we have going on, which there are a lot, resources for you, and jobs. There are people that are posting jobs available all the time. And so make sure you're checking that out, and you might find something that is a good fit for you. On an ongoing basis, there's a lot of cool stuff through Crossroads for you in job transition. On a weekly basis, we have a networking group that meets 2-day Thursdays between 9 and 11. So right after our time together today. And that group is run by Wes Tang and Wes Roper. Their group's been around for, gosh, over 10 years. And it's, I think, one of the best networking groups in the Twin Cities for job transition. And so certainly plug into that. And it will help you meet other people going through job transition, and they're all there with their networks to help connect you with targeted companies or information that you're wanting to learn about your next work opportunity. We also have one-on-one coaching available. So if you would like to sit down with somebody and have them look over your resume, or just do a mock interview, or talk about options in your job search. I know I had no clue what I wanted to do, so I was totally lost. And so just sitting down with somebody, we've got, gosh, over 30 coaches from any of which I am one, but there's from all different walks of life and different careers, and so wonderful variety of perspectives to offer you. And we're all willing to get together, sit down, Zoom, whatever, and answer any questions that you might have. And we're also big believers in prayer here at Crossroads. And so if you have a prayer, whether it's just strength to get through this challenging period of job transition, you've got an interview coming up that you're nervous about, or whatever it might be, there are people praying for you. And if you submit a specific prayer request, we will absolutely pray on that specific thing to help you in that regard. There's also a great resource that I found incredibly helpful. Again, I'd never looked for a job. I had started my own company out of college and ran it for 27 years. So I'd never looked for a job. And we've got an 8-week class that literally goes through every element of job transition that you could possibly imagine. Everything from attitude to networking, negotiating your salary, interviewing skills, resumes, the soup and nuts of every element of job transition. And so, and there's new classes starting every month. So if you're not in one, you should be. Get signed up, and you will find that to be incredibly helpful in your journey to just not only go through it with another 3-4 people that are be assigned in your group, but also just to get all the primary elements of job transition covered for you, and make sure you're on the right page in that regard. Make sure that you join the LinkedIn group, MN Crossroads Career Network. Great resource, a lot of information as far as the ongoing activities and all that, and a way to kind of, for all of us in the group to kind of keep in touch. And so great resource for you there. And this is super cool. We now have a YouTube page, MN Crossroads Career Network on YouTube. And presentations like you heard from Dave today are great presentations, great speakers that are authors that speak all over the country. And we've got this wonderful YouTube channel of many of the past presentations that are sitting there for you that you can watch whenever you want. You can rewatch Dave's and whatever. It's fantastic. It is, I refer to it as a treasure chest of amazing information, knowledge, motivation. So gosh, take advantage of that. It's sitting there and you can watch it whenever you want. We also have a lot of other resources, and I'm privileged. My company Thrivent has had a wonderful relationship with Crossroads for many years, and it's our great pleasure to help financially and otherwise for this fantastic group and organization that locally Harry Erdschl has put together. And it is our privilege to be able to do so. There's a variety of companies that do that, and there's also a lot of people that are involved. Harry's put together an incredible team of folks that I referenced earlier from a vast variety of backgrounds and careers and all that. And these people are all waiting for you to reach out for counseling. You want to meet and have questions or whatever. That's what we're there for. So don't hesitate to reach out. It's a great team, and we've been there before. We've been through job transition, and so we'd love to help any way we can. As I mentioned, the 3 churches that we're affiliated with, here are the sites for them. And if you don't have a church home of your own, any one of the 3 would love to see you. So please reach out, and both of them typically have both in-person and streaming options available. So that is the information that we've got. Again, if you are joining us from someplace outside of Minnesota, put in the chat box where you're joining us from. We're always thrilled to hear from where people are joining us. We go from all over the country to all over the world. So certainly if you're not Minnesota, let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to see it. But our next opportunity for you to learn is going to be coming on April 14th. Now that meeting is not in the morning, it's in the evening. It's at 7 p.m. Don't show up in the morning because nobody will be here. 7 p.m. And we've got a wonderful woman, Jennifer Radke, is going to be talking about maximizing social media in your job search. She's a social media expert, great resource. And so if you want to improve your social media presence regarding your job search, which is huge in job search, don't miss Jennifer Radke on April 14th at 7 p.m. You sign up the same way you signed up for this event. And also, we do have ongoing workshops, educational workshops. I do 3 a month on the first, second, and third Tuesday. You sign up again the same way you'd sign up for this. They're all available for you there. Different topics. If that's something you'd like more information on, don't hesitate to sign up. Love to see you. So we hope you found this beneficial. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and wish you a wonderful day of blessing. And we look forward to seeing you again at an upcoming event, hopefully very soon. And until that time, blessings to you. Enjoy the day.